Um, so we are continuing Revelation 14. We stopped at Revelation 14:12, a very important verse. And like I said, it's one of the verses, Revelation 14:12. It's one of the verses when somebody hands me a Bible and says, "Oh, this is better version than the King James." One of the first verses I look at is Revelation 14:12. And if it's been changed, I can hand the Bible back and say, "Okay, no, we don't need to look at it anymore." That's it, because that's a very important verse. And I look at the verses that we looked at from Galatians, especially 2:16. I look at Romans chapter 3, and these verses, and there are others that define what the faith of the Messiah is. And that's very important in understanding the receiving of the righteousness and the truth of the gospel and what the gospel is. And so the Messiah's witness is his faith. That's the faith of the Father. That's the witness of the Father's righteousness. That's the Father showing himself through his Son, the Messiah. So when we receive the Father's Spirit, we are able to obey his commandments. You cannot keep his commandments in any perfect way without his Spirit dwelling in you. That's what he says. So if you're trying to obey commandments without the Father's Spirit, there were people in the Messiah's day called Sadducees. They didn't believe in any spirit, yet they claimed to be keeping the commandments. That's uh, that's not only is it impossible, people that do that are very sad and hard people to live with because they become a righteousness by works type of people. See, that's the difference between righteousness by works and righteousness by faith. Righteousness by faith receives a spirit that's from above. It's from the Father. Righteous by works don't receive any such spirit, but seeks to obey by carnal means the commandments. That's righteous by works. But the spirit of the Father is what inspires or actuates a person that is being obedient and being accepted by the Father. So we saw that. Now, next thing we're going to see some very powerful and interesting things in Revelation 14, in the sense that it's going to show us when the Messiah is going to return. It's not going to tell us the year, but it's going to tell us the time of year. It's going to show us what he's going to do and what it means. Let's take a look at this. Revelation chapter 14. Revelation 14, I'm going to begin at verse 13, and I'm going to read down to verse 20 of Revelation chapter 14, from verse 13 down to verse 20 of Revelation chapter 14. Notice what it says. And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, Blessed are the dead, which die in Yahweh from henceforth. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle into the earth, and the earth was reaped. And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast it into the winepress of the wrath of Yahweh. And the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horse bridles, by a space of 1,600 furlongs. Let's take a close look at this. Now, brothers and sisters, you can obviously see there's an imagery here that's representing an harvest. Well, actually, there's two harvests. There's a harvest of the wrath of the Most High, and then there's another harvest. There's two harvests represented here today. You see these two. So from verse 13 to verse 20, we looked at, it says the Messiah came and he sat on a cloud and he had a sickle. A sickle is used to reap wheat harvest. That's what a sickle is used for. So you're using a sickle to cut down the wheat and reap the harvest of the wheat, and then bind it up and put it in the barn. Okay. And in fact, that's what the Messiah said in Matthew chapter 13. That's what he said in terms of his return was going to be like a wheat harvest Notice again, Matthew chapter 13. Matthew 13. I'm going to read from verse 24 down to verse 24 down to verse 30 of Matthew chapter 13, from verse 24 down to 30. Notice what it says. Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat, and went his way. But when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? And he said unto them, an enemy hath done this. The servant said unto him, wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. Let both grow together unto the harvest. And in the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, gather ye first the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. Now, later on, the disciples asked him to explain this parable. So let's skip down to verse 36 of Matthew chapter 13, and let's see the master's explanation of this parable that he gave from verse 36. Then Yahushua sent the multitude away and went into the house. And his disciples came unto him, saying, declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. He answered and said unto them, he that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of this world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angel, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire, and there shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. So you can see here, he says that he explained it very plainly for everyone to know. The field represents the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom. The tares are the children of the wicked one. Very plain. And he says the enemy sowed them is the devil, and the harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. He said the tares are going to be burned in fire at the end of the world. And he said he's going to send forth his angels and gather out of his kingdom everything that offends and them that do iniquity. And they're going to be in a furnace of fire. So he represented this in the book of Revelation in chapter 14 when he talked about a harvest. Now, also, we need to understand, again, being Israelites, we understand that the Most High has feasts. And he has I gave it away already, but he has 3 feasts a year. There are 3 feasts a year. There's not more, there's not less. There's 3 feasts a year that the Most High gave Moses. Now, the Israelites kept a couple of other feasts in other times, like the Feast of Purim, which they kept as a result of their deliverance from the Amalekites while they was in Persia. But the feast that the Most High gave them himself through Moses are 3. There's only 3. There's no such thing as a feast of trumpets. There is a sounding of trumpets before the Day of Atonement, but there's no feast of trumpets. There are only 3 feasts. That is the Passover, which is also called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Same thing, it's synonymous. A lot of people try to break this up as if it's 2 separate feasts, kind of silly. But anyway, there's the Feast of Passover, which is the same as the Feast of Unleavened Bread. There is also the Feast of Weeks, which is also Pentecost. And then there is one more feast at the end of the year. Well, not quite all the way at the end of the Hebrew year. In the 7th month of the Hebrew year, there is a feast called the Feast of Tabernacles, otherwise known as the Feast of Ingathering. Okay, 3 feasts. Now, each feast has a significant event attached to it. So, for example, the Feast of the Passover actually had a significant event attached to it, in that the Lamb of Yah became sin for us who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of the Father in him. So now the Lamb, Yahushua, became a sin offering, and that's the representation of the Passover. He became the Passover lamb that was sacrificed for the sins of his people. Okay, so that the Passover and the Feast of Weeks is a sign of the Messiah's sacrifice for sin. Then you have the Feast of Weeks, okay, Feast of Weeks, which came 7 weeks after the first Sabbath of the Passover, first seventh day Sabbath of the Passover, and the first day of the week, and that represents the Feast of the first fruits of the harvest. How was this fulfilled? What significant event came on a Pentecost? Well, the Bible clearly shows us that the disciples received the power of the Father's Spirit upon them in a major way when the day of Pentecost was fully come in the first century after the Messiah's resurrection. Okay. So what about the third feast, the harvest one? Now, if you recall, the Feast of Harvest happens after a specific event. The Feast of Harvest happens after a specific event. Can you tell me the event that takes place prior to the Feast of Harvest, otherwise known as the Feast of Tabernacles? Can you tell me what is the specific? There is a blowing of horns. That's correct. On the first day of the 7th month, there is a blowing of horns. And then what happens? There's a blowing of horns, and then something else happens before the Feast of Ingathering or the Feast of Harvest. There's something else that happens. After the blowing of horns, there's a reason for the horns. What is the reason for the horns? What is the reason for the horns? There is a blowing of horns. The first day of the 7th month. What is the reason for the horns? That's right. That's exactly right. It's a warning of preparation for the people to get ready for something. Okay, very good. So what are they getting ready for? That's right. So they're getting ready for something. What are they getting ready for? It is a warning. What are they getting ready for? Let's take a look at it. Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus 23 and I'm going to read from verse 24 of Leviticus chapter 23. Actually, I'm going to read from verse 23 of Leviticus chapter 23. No, it's not that. Take a look at this now. We're talking about 3 feasts, and we're saying something that happens before a feast. You were right when you said the blowing of trumpets. That is one part of it. Let's take a look. Leviticus 23, beginning at verse 23. And Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, In the 7th month, pay attention now, in the 7th month, in the first day of the month, ye shall have a Sabbath, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. Ye shall do no servile work therein, but ye shall offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. So this is the first day of the 7th month. There's a blowing of trumpets. The first day of the 7th month, there's a blowing of trumpets. It is not a feast. They're keeping a Sabbath and they are blowing trumpets. It is not a feast. So all the people talking about the Feast of the Trumpets need to please go back and study your scriptures a little bit more. There's no Feast of the Trumpets. There's a blowing of trumpets. Okay, let's continue. Leviticus 23. Now let's start at verse 26. And Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, Also on the 10th day of this 7th month, there shall be a day of atonement. It shall be an holy convocation unto you. Ye shall afflict your souls and offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. And ye shall do no work in that same day, for it is a day of atonement to make an atonement for you before Yahweh your Most High. And for whatsoever soul it be that shall not be afflicted in the same day, he shall be cut off from among his people. And whatsoever so it be that doth any work in that day, the same so will I destroy from among his people. Ye shall do no manner of work, it shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. And it shall be unto you a Sabbath of rest. Ye shall afflict your souls in the 9th day of the month at even. From even unto even shall ye celebrate your Sabbath. Okay, so now the 10th day is the Day of Atonement. Now, when was that fulfilled? Now you recall Daniel chapter 8, Daniel 8, and it was Daniel 8:13 and 14, if you recall, where there was a long prophecy of 2,300 years. And Daniel was told that at the end of 2,300 years, the sanctuary would be cleansed. We found that these 2,300 years began, the Bible tells us in Daniel 9, at the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem. That came in 457 BC under Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes, the Persian king. So now Artaxerxes, the Persian king, gives that pronouncement 457 BC, and 2,000 years later, we find ourselves in 1844. And the Bible says that what was going to take place at that time is the sanctuary was going to be cleansed from sin. This is the historical event that had to do with the annual Yom Kippur or Day of Atonement. We saw that happened in 1844. And what happened in 1844? Messiah went from the holy place of the heavenly sanctuary, interceding for his people, into the most holy place to put sin away from his people and from the tabernacle, to cleanse the sin. Remember, it says after 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Okay. So that is the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary, the putting away of sin for his people, the preparation to be sealed in the Father's righteousness. That is the sign of the Day of Atonement. Now there's one more feast. One more feast. Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus chapter 23. Now we already saw the first day of the 7th month was the blowing of trumpets. We've already seen that the 10th day of the 7th month, Day of Atonement, and these have all been fulfilled. Messiah was crucified and resurrected, Passover. The outpouring of the Spirit upon the disciples, early rain, Feast of Weeks, or Feast of the First Fruits. The blowing of trumpets, a memorial for a warning. That would have been 1833. Warning that there's going to be a Day of Atonement in 1844. And then 5 days later, there was going to be a final feast. That is the 15th day of the 7th month, 5 days later. Leviticus chapter 23, verse 34. Leviticus 23, verse 34. Notice what it says. Leviticus actually 23:33, and starting at verse 33. And Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, The 15th day of the 7th month shall be the feast of tabernacles, for 7 days unto Yahweh. On the first day shall be an holy convocation. Ye shall do no servile work therein. 7 days ye shall offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. On the 8th day shall be an holy convocation unto you. And ye shall offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. It is a solemn assembly. Ye shall do no servile work therein. See? So this last feast is a feast of ingathering, the feast of tabernacle, the feast of harvest. It calls it a feast. And here in Leviticus chapter 23, it calls it the feast of tabernacle. But in Exodus, when you look at Exodus, if you look at Exodus chapter, let's see, hold on. Where is it? Exodus chapter, oh yes, chapter 23. Exodus chapter 23. My bad. Exodus chapter 23. Notice Exodus 23, it calls it by a different name. Exodus chapter 23. I'm going to read from verse Exodus 23 from verse 14. Notice what it says, Exodus 23:14. 3 times, again, it's reiterating, there's 3 feasts. Thou shalt keep a feast unto me in the year. Thou shalt keep the feast of unleavened bread, as the Passover. Thou shalt eat unleavened bread 7 days, as I commanded thee, in the time appointed in the month of Abib, for in it thou camest out of Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty. The feast of harvest, the first fruits of thy labor, which thou hast sown in the field, and the feast of ingathering, which is in the end of the year, when thou hast gathered in thy labors out of the field. So he said, 3 times in the year, all thy males shall appear before the Most High Yahweh. So you can see here, the feast of ingathering is the same as the feast of tabernacles, is the same feast. Feast of ingathering, a feast of gathering the harvest, ingathering the year-end harvest. So back to now, Revelation chapter 14, we see that the Messiah is given a sickle to create, to gather in a harvest. And he actually has 2 harvests. He has one of his people and one of the wicked. Now, the wicked, the one that's his people, is the wheat or the sheep. And he's gathering them in. Now, remember now, all the feasts had an event that went with them that made them prophetic. So the Passover had the Messiah paying the penalty for sin and resurrecting. The Feast of Weeks or the Pentecost had the disciples and the apostles receiving the power of the Spirit in a major way, called the early rain. Then we had the Day of Atonement, which, remember, Daniel was told this prophecy is long. It's like there's a great distance between the fulfillment of the Pentecost and the fulfillment of the feast. I mean, not the feast, that the Day of Atonement was 2,300 years. And then that was 1844. After that, we know that there was a delay. Messiah could have come back 5 years later, each day for a year, 5 days, the 15th day of the month. He could have come back, but he was a delay. And we know the delay was because the 144,000 were not yet born or sealed. But now the last feast is going to be completed, and the last event to take place is the return of the Messiah. As Revelation 14 shows us, he comes with the sickle in his hand. So he's coming at the Feast of Ingathering. Okay, he's coming in the Feast of Ingathering. So we know that in the Hebrew calendar, the 7th month, the 15th day of the 7th month, the Messiah is going to return. We know that he's going to come back. We don't know what year. People try to guess what year. That has not been revealed to me yet. I don't know if it's been, I don't think it's been revealed to anybody yet. But we know the 7th month, the 15th day, which is going to be a full moon, because the moon is full halfway through the month for the Hebrew. It's going to be a full moon, 15th day, 7th month. He's going to return. What year? I don't know. But it's going to be 15th day, 7th month. And the Bible said, we read it in Revelation chapter 8. Notice Revelation chapter 8 and verse 1. Revelation 8:1. And when he had opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. That's about 8 days. And if you recall, during the Feast of Ingathering, the first day is a Sabbath, and then they keep the feast 7 days, and then there's an 8th day, and the 8th day is a Sabbath. So in the space of half an hour, when the 7th seal is open, that means the book of life is now fully opened, and the Messiah knows who the subjects of his kingdom are, and he's going to gather them in, and there's going to be silence in heaven because we're going to be keeping the Feast of Tabernacles. That's the sign, the Feast of Tabernacles. We don't know what year yet. We know what time of year, though. 7th month, 15th day of the month. Early autumn. Feast of Tabernacle. Messiah return. Okay? We don't know what year yet. Most High will show us that in time. But he's revealed to us the time of year it's going to happen. 7th month, 15th day of the month. He's also revealed to us the time, because both the deliverance of the Egyptian bondage and Job's prophecy of future deliverance. In the book of Job, there's a prophecy of future deliverance. Midnight. Midnight is the time. Midnight is the time. 7th month is the month. 15th day is the day. We don't know the year yet, but he will reveal that to us as we continue to give glory to the Father by seeking his righteousness. His Spirit will reveal it to us. At midnight, 7th month, 15th day of the month, for the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay. Okay. What about the second part, where the angel came out the temple and he had power over fire, and he thrust in his sickle and he said, the clusters of the vine of the earth, her grapes are fully ripe. And he talks about blood coming out of the wine press. Now, a wine press is something where somebody's like walking in a circle and crushing grapes. And he said that this was, but people was in this one. And who is doing the crushing? I want to show you. Who is doing the crushing of these people that are in the winepress of the wrath? And you recall, when we read chapter 14, he said, whoever received the mark of the beast and his image, and worship the beast and his image and receive his mark in the forehead or the hand. Yahweh from henceforth, yea, said the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and their works do follow them. And so while we're in Isaiah, I want to show you what that means by the Spirit of the Most High's word. I want to show you what that means. Isaiah chapter 57. Isaiah chapter 57. I'm going to begin at verse 1. Going to begin at verse 1. And notice from verse 1, I'm going to read down to verse I'm going to read down to verse 4. The righteous perisheth, and no man layeth it to heart. And merciful men are taken away, none considering that the righteous is taken away from the evil to come. He shall enter into peace. They shall rest in their beds, each one walking in his uprightness. But draw near hither, ye sons of the sorceress, the seed of the adulterer and the whore. Against whom do ye sport yourselves? Against whom make ye a wide mouth and draw out the tongue? Are ye not children of transgression, a seed of falsehood? So, brothers and sisters, at this time, many people will be put to rest. Many people will be put to rest. In other words, they'll die that are considered righteous to the Most High. And he's putting them to rest because he doesn't think they would be able to make it in the time of trouble that's to come. So he says, they'll enter into their beds, that's in their graves. They're entering the rest, each one in his uprightness. So there's going to be a lot of people that are going to die that are the Most High's people, that he's going to allow to put to rest. If you notice, I mean, we've been noticing friends of ours that are relatively young dying suddenly, like pancreatic cancer, accidents, things like this, just suddenly being, and you're like, wow, we thought they were going to be around at the end, and the Most High puts them to rest. There are people that are being put to rest, just like Noah's father. Noah's father was named Lamech. Lamech's father was Methuselah. Methuselah outlived Lamech. Lamech lived to be 777. And Methuselah lived until the year that Noah entered the ark, that same year. When you look at the numbers and how the life they lived, the years they lived in the book of Genesis, chapter 5, when you look at that, you will see Methuselah actually died the same year that Noah entered into the ark. Lamech died before that, and the age is no coincidence. Age is 777 completion. And so these men were put to rest before the flood. Just like then, so it is now. People are going to be put to rest before the flood, before the destruction that's to come. Okay, so he's going to seal people and seal them in his righteousness to save them before the things that are going to come on planet Earth. Now let's look at Isaiah chapter 63. This is one that is oftentimes misunderstood. But let's take a look at this Isaiah chapter 63. We're going to start at verse 1. And we're going to continue reading from verse 1. I'm going to read down to verse 7, verse 9. Actually, I'm going to keep reading for a minute. So I'm going to start at verse 1. Notice what happens. Who is this that cometh from Edom with dyed garments from Basra? This that is glorious in his apparel and traveling in the greatness of his strength. I that speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Wherefore art thou red in thine apparel, and thy garments like him that treadeth in the wine vat? I have trodden the winepress alone, and of the people there was none with me. For I will tread them in mine anger, and trample them in my fury. And their blood shall be sprinkled upon my garments, and I will stain all my raiment. For the day of vengeance is in my heart, and the year of my redeemed is come. And I looked, and there was none to help, and I wondered that there was none to uphold. Therefore my own arm brought salvation unto me, and my fury it upheld me. And I will tread down the people in mine anger, and make them drunk in my fury. And I will bring down their strength to the earth. I will make mention of the loving kindnesses of Yahweh, and praises of Yahweh according to all that Yahweh hath bestowed on us, and the great goodness toward the house of Israel, which he hath bestowed on them according to his mercies and according to the multitude of his loving kindnesses. Now look at this. So he's showing the Messiah is trampling on people, destroying people that fought against Israel, people that were oppressors to Israel. Because he noticed what he said there. He said, his great goodness toward the house of Israel. Then verse 8, for surely they are my people, the children that will not lie. So he was their savior. And in all their affliction, he was afflicted. And the angel of his presence saved them in his love, and in his pity he redeemed them, and he bare them and carried them all the days of old. But they rebelled and vexed his Holy Spirit. Therefore he was turned to be their enemy and fought against them. Then he remembered the days of old, Moses and his people, saying, where is he that brought them up out of the sea with the shepherd of his flock? Where is he that put his Holy Spirit within him? Then led them by the right hand of Moses with the glorious arm, dividing the water before them, to make himself an everlasting name. That led them through the deep as in house in the wilderness, that they should not stumble. See, so he was wroth with his people, but at the end, he's going to destroy all those that oppressed his people. He's going to destroy all those that were fighting against his people. And he says he's going to trample them so that his clothes that are white are going to be red, which is exactly what we read. And notice he mentions is Edom, Edomites. And he says, this is exactly what he says in Revelation chapter 14, Revelation 14. And he said, the thrust in his sickle, and he said, the winepress was trodden, that is stamped on, without the city, and blood came out of the winepress into the horses' bridles by the space of 1,600 furlongs. So he's trampling on the wicked. He's stomping them. The Messiah is stomping those that fight against the children of Israel. You see. And then it's interesting, if you don't understand what's happening, he said, I will mention the loving kindness of Yahweh. In a chapter where he's describing himself as stomping them to death, he is saying he has loving kindness, which sounds like a contradiction. But think of it like this, brothers and sisters. Imagine if you walked in your house one day, and you walked in your house and you found in your house a man had broken in and was in the process of raping your daughter. What would you do? You walked in the house and you heard the noises and you walked in and a man was in the process of raping your daughter. Yes, you would kill him. You would kill him. You would kill him with a death that would be as horrible as you could make it, right? You would kill him as quickly and you would just kill that man and then you would make sure your daughter was okay. You would check on your daughter after you wouldn't even concern with that man anymore. After you killed him, you want to make sure your daughter is okay, right? You're going to check on him. That's the way the Messiah is looking at this. He's going to stomp on the wicked who have been fighting and oppressing his people and have went overboard in their oppressing of his people. He's going to pull out the full fury on them that have chosen the devil and the mark of the beast and the image and have oppressed his people. Then he's going to check on his people. He's going to show them his loving kindness. Yes, I was angry with you. Yes, we were apart. Yes, we were on the house. Yes, we had beef, but now I'm bringing you back. I'm bringing you back. And the people that are going to come back, the heathen that are going to join unto the righteous, the heathen that are going to join with those that are redeemed by the Messiah and by the Father, they're going to keep the Feast of the Tabernacles. See, because the Feast of the Tabernacles is the final sign, and that brings us to Zechariah chapter 14. Notice Zechariah chapter 14. And I don't want to read to chapter 14. I want to explain something that some brothers are misinterpreting. Let me just say this to you. Rape in the Israelite nation is punishable by death. Okay? So when a man rapes a woman in the Israelite nation, rape is punishable by death. So notice here in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 1 and 2. We're going to read down from there, but verse 1 and 2, describing the Feast of the Tabernacles and the same harvest that Revelation 14 is describing, the same thing that Isaiah 63 is describing in other places. Behold, the day of Yahweh cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, and the women ravished. And half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. There are some that take this to say that we're going to be raping the heathen women. We are not going to be raping the heathen women. But the heathen women are going to get raped. Well, who's going to rape them? Their own men are going to rape them. You understand? Just like we see where the Bible shows us how the wicked are going to fight against each other, their own men are going to rape them. Their own men go be going crazy raping them. This is Zechariah 14, verse 1 and 2. Their own men are going to be raping them. Ravish means to be raped. Their own men are going to do that to them. We're not going to be raping anybody. Okay? We're not going to be raping anybody. And but verse 2 is describing how our women have been raped. Notice it says, I gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, and the women ravished. Our women, Hebrew women, have been raped. They've been raped by Caucasian men. Even if they were married when they were slaves, didn't matter if the Caucasian man wanted one of them, he would take them, and there was nothing the brother that was the husband could do about it. Nothing he could do about it. Okay? In the movie The Butler, which is a true story, the butler, his father was killed by a Caucasian man because they were working in the fields sharecropping, and the Caucasian man came out and decided he wanted the boy's mother, and he dragged the mother into a shed and raped her. And when he came out, the father just turned and said, hey, you, because he didn't know what to do, and the man pulled the gun out and shot him dead in cold blood right there. But they can get away with that. Yep. They can get away with that. Okay? So now they can't do that now because they're going to be the ones. But see, this is explained right here. Chapter 1 and 2 is explaining our history before the deliverance. That's what it is. Chapter 1 and 2 of Zechariah 14 is explaining our history and why the Most High is going to now punish the heathen. Notice verse 3. starting Zechariah 14, verse 3. Then shall Yahweh go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. So the nations that brought us into slavery, the nations that destroyed Jerusalem, the people that attacked us and that oppress us, he's going to fight against them. He's going to turn and fight against them. His feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west. And there shall be a very great valley. And half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south. And ye shall flee to the valley of the mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach unto Azal. Yea, ye shall flee like as ye fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. And Yahweh, my Most High, shall come, and all the saints with thee, all the redeemed, all the angels. And it shall come to pass in that day that the light shall not be clear nor dark, but it shall be one day which shall be known to Yahweh, not day nor night, but it shall come to pass that at evening time it shall be light. That's the same we read in Revelation chapter 21. And it shall be in that day that living waters shall go out from Jerusalem, half of them toward the former sea and half of them toward the hinder sea. In summer and winter it shall be. That's the same thing that Ezekiel 47 talks about. It's the same thing that Revelation 22 talks about. It's written in several places. Here we are in Zechariah. It's talking about the same thing. The river of the water of life coming from the throne of Yah in the kingdom, in the New Jerusalem. Okay? And Yahweh shall be king over all the earth. And in that day there shall be one Yahweh, and his name one. All the land shall be turned as a plain from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem. And it shall be lifted up and inhabited in her place, from Benjamin's gate unto the place of the first gate unto the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananiel unto the king's wine presses. And men shall dwell in it. And there shall be no more utter destruction, no more war. But Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. And this shall be the plague where Yahweh will smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall consume away while they stand upon their feet. Their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongue shall consume away in their mouth. Wait, that's when the fire of Yah comes down out of heaven and devours them. Revelation chapter 20. See, same thing. Revelation chapter 20. Okay? So now we continue. And it shall come to pass in that day that a great tumult from Yahweh shall be among them. And they shall lay hold every one on the hand of his neighbor, and his hand shall rise up against the hand of his neighbor. See, they're going to start killing each other. When they see that they lost, they're going to start killing each other, raping their own women. As they raped ours, they're going to rape their own. And Judah also shall fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the heathen round about shall be gathered together, gold and silver and apparel in great abundance. So shall be the plague of the horse, of the mule, of the camel, of the ass, and of all the beasts that shall be in these tents as this plague. And it shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all nations that fought against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, Yahweh of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So the people that are among the heathen that come to this truth and surrender and are grafted into the nation, they're going to keep the Feast of the Tabernacles with the nation of Israel and keep the feast at Jerusalem. See, notice the feast is at Jerusalem. You can't just keep a feast any place. That's what we keep telling people. Now, I understand people get all excited about understanding who they are now, knowing they're Hebrews, and they want to get close to that culture, so they start keeping the feast. But I don't want anybody to think that that's a salvation issue. Like if you don't keep the feast, that somehow you're not a Hebrew. You can't keep feasts in your enemy's land. A feast is to be kept in the promised land to show that it is our land, that we are there and we're never leaving again. You understand? But now we're in our enemy's land. We're in Babylon. Can't keep no feast in Babylon. The Bible said, how can you sing a song of Zion in your enemy's land? You sing a song of Zion when you're in the promised land, when you're in your land. Okay? Verse 17. And it shall come to pass that whoso will not come up of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, Yahweh of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. And if the family of no rain means no Holy Spirit power, which is why they're going to be destroyed. And if the family of Egypt go not up and come not, that have no rain, there shall be the plague, wherewith Yahweh will smite the heathen that come not up to keep the feast of tabernacles. See, so if you're redeemed from among the heathen, you are with the nation of Israel. You're going to be keeping the feast of tabernacles. This shall be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all nations that come not up to keep the feast of the tabernacle. In that day shall there be upon the bells of the horses holiness unto Yahweh. And the pots of Yahweh's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. Yea, every pot in Jerusalem, talk about the Feast of Tabernacles, because they use pots now to boil the flesh and to eat the food, and to make sure all the blood was out. And in Judah shall be holiness unto Yahweh of hosts, and all they that sacrifice shall come and shall take of them and shall see therein. In that day there shall be no more Canaanite in the house of Yahweh of hosts. No more Canaanite. So you can see Revelation 14 goes with what we just read in Zechariah chapter 14. It also goes with what we read in Isaiah chapter 63. It also goes with the parable of the parable of the wheat and the tares in Matthew chapter 13. It goes with all of these things. Revelation 14. And we know now what time of year Messiah is going to return. He's going to return in early autumn, the 7th month, which is equivalent to what we call September. Generally speaking, it could also be in October, depending on the number of the new moons in a given year. But generally speaking, the 7th month is in September of a given year. Okay, so here we are in September. It's going to be a month just like this, where the Messiah will return. We don't know what year, and it's going to be a full moon. So look for the full moon. Look, wait, right now we just had a new moon a few days ago. So when you see the new moon this month, particularly we're in September now, when this is the 7th moon now. So when you look at the new moon, the full moon this month, just think of this is going to be a night like that where your Messiah and my Messiah is going to return. That's how real it is. That's how soon it is. Okay, so right now, if you can, when you look up tonight, if it's clear sky and you can see the moon, you're going to notice the moon is going to half now. It's from the quarter, which is the beginning of the moon, going to half. Then it's going to be a full moon. That's going to be just like the return of Messiah, the 15th day. The full moon represents the middle of the month. 15th day of this 7th month at midnight, he's going to deliver us. Okay, praise the Most High Yah. That's Revelation chapter 14. That's the sickle. That's the 2 harvests. So the first one, he's going to gather up his people. We're going to be in the land, in the New Jerusalem. He's gathering up his people. We're going to be in the land, in the New Jerusalem. It's going to come down from heaven. It's going to cause a great valley to develop, right? We just saw that. And it's going to set down. And then the heathen that fight against us is going to be destroyed. They're going to be trying to destroy each other. And we're going to live and reign with the Messiah for 1,000 years. At the end of 1,000 years, there's going to be a second resurrection. And they're going to try to take the city again. And they're going to be destroyed, but this time for good. They will never rise up a third time. That's it. We're going to read more about this as we continue in the book of Revelation and as we study Ezekiel. We're going to read more about this. But for right now, you see that the 144,000 will bring forth a message. They'll be prepared to bring forth a message. They'll be prepared by righteousness of the Father's Spirit to bring forth straight truth, no guile in their mouth, straight truth. The message will be threefold from the Father. Okay, threefold message. The first message is the power of the everlasting gospel, which is the power of the Father's righteousness to cause the receiver to overcome all their sin, to be justified, to be declared innocent, and to keep the commandments, statutes, and judgments of the one true creator who made heaven and earth, to see and all that in them is. That's the first part of the message. The second part of the message is Babylon is doomed. The whole society, the whole Eurocentric dominated society, the whole sons of Yafet, all the Islamic nations, all the Christian nations, all the Judaism, it's going to be all destroyed. It's finished. The third one said, if any of y'all worship this beast, you listen to them changing these laws, trying to break the covenant of Yah. When they do this, any of you guys follow the beast or his image. You following the beast, the dragon, or the false prophet, whichever one of the 3 sixes that you want to follow, the beast, the dragon, or the false prophet, you're going to receive the wrath of the Most High. And that wrath includes being stomped to death by the Messiah. It says, in the cup of his indignation, and without mixture. That means without mixture means, brothers and sisters, no mercy. He not playing. The Father's not playing. He ain't playing. People can complain, they can philosophize all they want. It's not going to change what the Father getting ready to do. That's why when we speak these words, when we talk about this gospel, when we talk about the truth of the Hebrews, who the Israelites really are, when we talk about these things, brothers and sisters, we are really trying to call Jacob back to his father, and we're trying to warn the heathen of what's getting ready to come. And we're trying to bring Jacob back to his father. That's what we do. And then Most High is using these events, this life in Babylon, to develop patience in his people, to develop faith in him by his people, to trust in the witness of the righteousness of the Father's Spirit, to obey his commandments, statutes, and judgments. That's what he's doing. And then there will be a harvest of deliverance. So now we're going to next study chapter 15, which is going to lead us actually into the 7 last plagues. Chapter 15 is going to lead us into the 7 last plagues. So let's look at that. We'll look at that by the grace of the Most High next Friday evening. We'll be studying that. For now,